Texas Lutheran University.
So welcome to Texas Lutheran University for our Master Naturalists and our Native Plant Society people. We're glad to have you here. And of course, all of our students, we're always glad you're here. So today we're excited to welcome Bill Carr. He received his Bachelor of Science in Botany from Ohio State, and then he moved to Texas. And he spent 25 years doing field work for Texas plant conservation programs. And he worked for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and with the Nature Conservancy of Texas. He's going to talk a little bit about his history for those of you that are kind of curious to hear what led him to this different degree paths and jobs that he's had. As you can see on the screen, he has founded a company called Acme Botanical Services, and he's also the part-time curator at the Plant Resources Center at the University of Texas, Austin. So let's welcome Bill Carr.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be inside on such a beautiful day. So thanks for coming in. And like she said, I've got my degree at Ohio State a long time ago and kind of moved to Texas on purpose. And when I hey, come on. There it is. And but I graduated with a BS in botany, which in most places won't get you much of a job. So I figured if I wasn't going to have much of a job, there was no need to stay in Ohio. I might as well come to Texas, which I liked. I learned about from hitchhiking down here from Ohio back in the 70s when you could hitchhike safely. So every spring break, everybody else would go to Daytona, and I'd go out to Big Bend. And at that point, I just really developed a fascination with the flora of Texas. And so when I realized I was going to be unemployed in Ohio, I said, I'm just going to go be unemployed in Alpine, Texas. And that worked pretty well. I did find unemployment, but eventually I had to move to Austin just because that's where jobs were. But it's just as good. But when I told people I was going to Texas, people in Ohio, at least at that time, had this image of Texas, this dirt, flat, ugly, windmills, lots of cattle. I should have had a cowboy hat in there somewhere. But I knew better, having been here. I knew it was a fascinating place. Luckily, I'm a botanist, so I knew better. This is from the movie Alien. How many of you have seen Alien? The Martian. The Martian. See, I haven't actually seen it, but I was sitting there typing at my office, listening to NPR one night, and they did a review of this movie, and they had this quote, and I'm listening to the radio going, did he just say, luckily I'm a botanist? I just about fell out of my chair. But actually, Texas is a really cool place for plants, believe it or not. We have almost 6,000 wild species, most of them native, or maybe 15% non-native, a lot of plants. The only state in the country that has more species than we do is California, and that's by quite a bit, actually. But as you know, being Texans, we have all kinds of different vegetation zones. We've got everything from coastal marshes to mountains in the Trans-Pecos, everything in between, all kinds of soils. You may not have known that we have 700 grass species. So when you're out identifying grasses, that's why it's hard, because there's so many of them, more than any other state. But the thing that really gets it for me is this one, the more than 300 endemic species. And by endemic, we mean that they only grow here. They're only in Texas, nowhere else in the world. And as someone who does a lot of conservation work, that's a pretty big deal. Like, you can't conserve these things in Oklahoma or Arkansas or Coahuila or Nuevo Leon or anywhere else. They only grow here, so we have to take care of the things we have. And another interesting thing about working in Texas is that you can still find plant species new to science here in Texas. This is one that somebody found in the Big Bend area up in the Chisos Mountains just a couple years ago, a milkweed vine. And there are things, we found new species on the Edwards Plateau not far from here. in the last 10 years. It's really interesting. There just hasn't been a whole lot of work done on the flora of Texas. So anybody that goes out has a good chance of making a big contribution. So it's a great place to be. So why is there so much stuff in Texas? Point it this way. There you go. Could it be geology? This is one of my favorite map comparisons because it really makes you realize how important geology is. So the thing to notice on this is that this geology map has all these different blobs. Those are different rock formations from anywhere from Cambrian stuff here and Precambrian stuff here to recent alluvium along the coast. Different ages, different kinds of rocks, just about every kind of rock you can imagine. And the one on the right is a map of the natural regions. And the natural regions are places where the dominant vegetation is kind of the same, the geology is kind of the same, the soils are similar, and they just have a familiar look about them. And you can notice that things like this little pink blob here corresponds to this little pink blob here. This is the Llano Uplift where Enchanted Rock is. So this Enchanted Rock area is one natural region, and it's defined by the underlying geology, like the Precambrian gneisses and granites and Cambrian sandstones, a whole different setup than the rest of the state. And then the stuff surrounding it is all Cretaceous limestone, and that corresponds with what we call the Edwards Plateau. There's a bunch of dust that blew out here from the Rockies back in not very long ago, and that corresponds to the high plains. And these Permian things correspond to the Permian red beds or the rolling plains. You'll notice there's a lot of correspondence between the geology and the major vegetation types. And that's really cool. That's what it's all about. And for those of us who live here, where we do, and so we're right here where all this different stuff comes together. You've got, if you drive over to New Braunfels, you get onto the Edwards Plateau. You drive, and on the way you pass through the Blackland Prairie, which is mostly cultivated. But the one region that I really want to talk about is this little dark green one, the Oak Woods and Prairies. And that is underlain by this little orangey band, which is an Eocene sandstone group, or lots of Eocene sandstone groups. So these have, this geology has a profound impact on what you see when you go out driving around. And here's a comparison of how different these natural regions are. There's two parks on this map. This is Government Canyon, the GC, and then B is Bastrop. And both of these parks have been really heavily inventoried by Texas Parks and Wildlife and their employees, such as myself, within the last 10 years. So we know these parks really well. We have a good number of species. We think we know just about everything that's there. And the cool thing is that almost nothing overlaps between these two parks. Oh, here's a Google Earth view. I kind of like this because you can see the natural region boundary right there, right along 35. We're at the end of the Cretaceous limestone, and then you get out on the Cretaceous clays of the Blackland Prairie. It's all cultivated. And then you can kind of just barely see this dark green band here, and that is the post oak and yaupon vegetation of the Oak Woods and Prairies, the south end of the county here. So altogether, those two parks, Government Canyon and Bastrop State Park, have 10,074 plant species. And the interesting thing to me is that only 188 of those are shared by the two parks. So Bastrop has 530 plant species that don't grow in Government Canyon, and Government Canyon has 356 species that don't grow in Bastrop State Park. They're 100 miles apart, but they might as well be on different planets. So that's why you have problems. We were talking earlier about growing certain kind of milkweeds in the sand. So you want to get the ones that are from Bastrop rather than Government Canyon, because Government Canyon is limestone and you're on sand like Bastrop. The problem with that is that the plants of this area, the sandy areas, are generally not available in the nursery trade yet. So if there are a young enterprising botanist who wants to start a company, native plants of deep sands is an untapped market. So let's get back to this concept of endemism and where the hot spots are. We have these 315 or 320 species that only grow in Texas. And this is how they shake out according to the natural regions map. So the numbers don't add up to 315 because a lot of endemics will grow in more than one region. Like the ones we have on the sand here in Guadalupe County will also grow on the sand closer to the coast, different bands in a different region, but it's still sand. But the hot spots, the places with the greatest concentrations of these endemic plants that are only in Texas are, the Edwards Plateau has the most. I mean, it's globally recognized as a strange place with lots of plants that don't grow anywhere else in the world. But not far behind it is the Gulf Coast prairies and marshes, for reasons I can't quite fathom. And then number 3 is the oak woods and prairies, this one here that we're going to talk about, this post-oak belt in south central Texas. And that's a lot of plants that are endemic to the state in one little narrow band. But the Edwards Plateau gets most of the attention from conservation groups, mostly because of these 2 birds, the golden-cheeked warbler on the top and the black-cap vireo on the bottom. They're both federally listed as endangered. And because they're animals, that means a lot. If you're a listed plant, it makes no difference whatsoever. It's just a designation. But for birds, it requires a lot of serious effort to conserve them. And one of the things they've done on the Edwards Plateau, and in Austin, the region especially, is they came up with this thing called the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, which was contributed to by the city of Austin and Travis County and the federal government, LCRA, a whole bunch of groups got together and pooled their resources to conserve the habitat for these 2 birds as best they could. And they ended up with this huge amount of new public land for the conservation of these birds, which is, no matter how you feel about these birds in particular or federal listing as endangered, it's still pretty cool that we have all this land set aside for conservation for forever, presumably. And of course, you can set up a preserve for birds, but the birds are surrounded by plants. So we get a little bit of the action too. So the oak woods and prairies has an endangered animal too, but it's not a bird, it's just the Houston toad. So it doesn't get the fanfare that the Edwards Plateau does. Everybody goes out and looks at birds. You see people birding all the time, but do you see people out toading? No. So I think we ought to adopt it. If we're doing plant conservation work in the oak woods and prairies, we'll just have to adopt the Houston toad. There's all these cool plants in this region, and where are they? Like I said before, some of these will grow in sandy soils here, but also a few counties over on the upper edge of the coastal plain. So they're in kind of 2 regions, but they're still endemic to Texas. But in this region, almost all the endemic plants are fairly common, which is, so you say, well, why do we have to worry about them if they're common? Well, for one thing, they're endemic. They're only here. They're nowhere else. And from my point of view, is that we can conserve them while they're still common. We do ourselves a favor. We don't wait till they become endangered and have to spend a whole bunch of money on them and a whole lot of effort. This natural region is in pretty good shape, believe it or not, compared to some of the others. So we just have to keep it that way. And that's a good problem. And one of the places where they're concentrated in this oak woods and prairies region is in a thing that I call the Eocene Sands. There are 3 Eocene formations from, 35 to 55 million years ago, laid down near shore in the Gulf of Mexico, where the coarse sediments settle out first and the finer sediments settle way out in the middle of the Gulf. So these are near shore deposits in that time frame. And 3 of them, for some reason, are way sandier than the others. There's the Carrizo Sand, the Queen City, and the Sparta. And what you can do, one of the great things our government did for us was started this thing called the Geologic Atlas of Texas. And if you like colorful maps, you can't beat these. These are cool. So all these different colors are different rock bands. And that's not the musical kind of rock band. It's geologic rock band. And you can trace these things as you're driving along and head to one specific formation and notice the change in the flora as you go from one to the other. But these three are just packed with these Texas endemics. And it's always really worth your time to go spend time on either of these three formations just to see what's there. So what's the characteristics of these Eocene sandy lands? They're where the most of the rare plants grow, the vegetation is usually pretty sparse. You just look out there and you go, man, that's just a bunch of sand and gophers, and nothing will grow there, and just looks pretty ugly. And there are usually openings in the major vegetation, which is the post oak woodland with eastern red cedar and blackjack and yopon, those things that are real familiar. They're always on deep sandy soils. The Soil Service has a classification scheme for classifying depth, and deep means something special in the soil world. And when you look out at these sites, a lot of times all you see are beautiful wildflowers. You don't see very much grass. So again, they don't look productive. And the soils, soils of these sites are, like I said, they're deep, they're moderately well drained. Sometimes they're excessively drained, but not usually. So you have this A horizon that's 3 to 5 feet deep of just sand. It's neutral sand. It's not calcareous. Slightly acid to neutral. And then the subsoils they get a little clay, or any clay that was in the soil originally apparently like leaches down to the bottom. And then at the very base of the profile, there's usually a clay layer. So the top part of the soil will seem really dry, and you dig down and there's during wet periods, and you can run into this wet spot. And I think that's what a lot of the trees in this region tap into. Even in dry periods, it looks like the soil is just totally dead, but the trees are still alive. And I think it has to do with that clay layer at depth. And another thing that characterizes these soils are gophers. There's a pocket gopher that is really common in this stuff. And as much time as I've spent on the Eocene Sands, I've never seen one. And there are also a whole bunch of different kinds of native ants on these soils. And one of the cool things about these soils is that fire ants don't particularly like them. They're there, but they're not like abundant like they are on the blackland prairie soils, the heavy clay soils. So these are fun places to run around. I don't have a really good picture of what one of these habitats looks like, but the point is they're pretty. There's lots of flowering plants. And here are some of them. I'm just going to run through some of these. There's lots and lots of really colorful wildflowers. It's one of the best places in the state to see wildflowers, and a lot of them are kind of only in this region. Not particularly rare, but plenty of them. One of the problems with working in this part of the world is that there's not a good field guide for wildflowers. Believe it or not, it's like the best place in the world to see wildflowers in the spring. We don't have a simple wildflower book. We've got a great one of the best in the world for the Edwards Plateau, but not for this part of the world. And of course, the more you get to know about plants, the more you'll love the Spurge family, but that's a different lecture. This is like the 4th largest plant family in Texas, and no one's ever heard of it. And some of our most common little plants with tiny flowers are in the Spurge family. These are not what you think. This is the first Texas state flower. When they named the bluebonnet the state flower, this species, which grows only on the deep sand, this Lupinus subcarnosus, was the one that was designated. And then everybody started planting Texas bluebonnets, and so they said, well, I guess we'll have to make it all the bluebonnets of the state. So that's what they did. But this was the original. If you can bring up an image of the Texas bluebonnet, the way they've got a big white spot at the top. Well, these are just solid blue. All right, so let's get back to the main topic, the rare endemic plants. And as I said before, these places are highly diverse, and they're really rich in Texas endemics. But we only have about a dozen of the super rare ones, the ones that are ranked by NatureServe, a group that operates out of Washington, as a G1 to G3, which means those numbers are associated with numbers of populations. So basically, that range is anywhere from 1 population in the whole world to 100 populations in the whole world. So there's only a few of those in Guadalupe County. And this is one of my favorites because it's named after the Carrizo Sand. How cool is that? Hymenopapus carrizoanus, or sandhill woolly white to normal people. It's a biennial that gets 2 feet tall most years. I was working in a place last year that was, it was really wet in the spring, and it got 6 feet tall. It was just unbelievable. Easily recognized by these finely divided leaves and then this broad panicle of flower heads at the top. It's actually a member of the sunflower family, so those things that look like single flowers are actually clusters of flowers, as is typical of the family. Here's its range. So you notice the green-filled counties are the counties in which it's known to occur. And look at the way it compares to that orangey band of Eocene Sands. This thing grows almost exclusively on the Carrizo, but it's been found on the Queen City and Sparta as well. But that's a narrow range, and that's it for this plant. It's the only place it grows in the world. And even in those counties, it's only on this 3-mile wide strip of Eocene sand. So here's a Google Earth image taken from the specimen, of the lat long on the specimen. And it's out there off of 1711 at the end of, I think it's called Red Road or something. But this is in those hills south of town. And that record was from the 1980s sometime, and hasn't been updated. So there's a project for master naturalists or students. Blooms in the spring, so and it blooms for quite a while, so you can get it in this semester. Here's another one with a kind of strange range, same general idea, still on that Carrizo Sand, but a big blank spot in the middle, and this is Bastrop County here. And I've spent a lot of time in Bastrop County at the park, and it's just not there. It was a candidate for the endangered species list back in the 1980s, and so there was a lot of effort to locate populations, and this was the best we could do, and that's not a whole lot. And this is a little annual, real small leaves, tiny white flowers, red stems. It doesn't have anything spectacular about it, but it doesn't look like anything else, so it's actually pretty easy to identify. But like a lot of plants, rare plants in Texas, we don't really know anything about it. We don't know what pollinates it, what it needs to germinate seeds. We don't know whether deer browse affects it. So if you want a project of some sort, you can pick any of the rare plants in Texas, but especially the ones out here, and just go out and study it and find out what you can find out, and your observations will be new. No one's done this stuff before in Texas, so that's all we know. So, I've been in this business long enough to know that, okay, these are the ones that have been reported, but it's over here too, somewhere, it's over here, we hope. And usually if you make a serious effort to find them in that right habitat, you will find them. They just haven't been reported. We just don't have enough botanists in Texas. We're way behind the rest of the country. So like I said, we don't know all these different things about it, and that's true of just about all the rare plants. We don't even know why it's called jointweed. Don't try this at home. And here's another one that nobody ever talks about. Everyone knows bee balms and horsemints. We have lots of different species of horsemint and bee balm in Texas. But this one's really unique. And again, it's very, very narrow range. This one's really easy to recognize because it's not only perennial instead of annual like most of our horsemints, but it's bushy. It just makes 50 or 100 stems from the top of the root crown, and really showy. So you can see how many flower stalks it makes. It just jumps out at you when you see it. Really, really narrow leaves. The picture on the right, see the way the leaves are kind of yellowish green. That's in good light, of course, but still, that's one of the ways you can recognize it is by super narrow leaves that are almost yellow instead of green. And you can see on the picture on the left the way it stands out in the foreground. It's hard to drive by this thing and not notice it. It's a showy plant. So you'd think that something that easy would be more often reported, but it just doesn't get reported. So we don't know much about its status either. And here's the 2 new pins there, one here in the center and one up at the top. You can imagine how the one on the top came about, because someone who was driving down that highway saw the plant, stopped and collected it. I don't know the source of the one in the center there, but again, just 2 records. So for those 3 plants, this is what we have from Guadalupe County. This is it. And I am guarantee you that there are more populations in between, but we just haven't had people looking. And we sure would like to know more about it, because it's, like I said, they're only in Texas. And here's those same points plotted on the geologic map. By the way, these are available on the internet now. They're not digitized, but they're scanned, so you don't have to order them from Austin. And essential for field work, because you have to know what formation you're on when you're out looking for plants, or you'll never find the right ones. But look at that, just that's fidelity to the Carrizo Sand. Pretty cool. And here's another one that has that same distribution, but also grows on the South Texas coast. Hasn't been found in Guadalupe County, to my knowledge. I don't know why. This map was created manually by a guy at University of Texas, and I think he just made a boo-boo. Because there's no specimen to back this up, but it certainly should be here. And it's an onion. It's named after the town of Elmendorf over by San Antonio. Smells like an onion, looks like an onion, tastes like an onion, but only grows in this part of the world. So you can recognize it by those white flowers, and then by these bulblets that come off the base of the big bulb. So when you pull this thing out of the ground, which is very easy to do because it's deep sand, they just pop right out. It'll come up with all these little bulblets attached from the bottom to the bottom of the main bulb. That's one of only 2 onions in Texas that does that. And this habitat picture shows you what I was talking about with the gophers. That's another way to recognize a hot spot. If you're driving along the road and you see a sandy field full of gophers, that means the soil conditions are right for these things. The same thing that makes a gopher want to burrow in that stuff is the stuff that the plants like. So that's like a little flag for us. Here's one that I'm going to experiment with this year on the ranch in Caldwell County where I've been working. It's called Texas Sand Mint, and it's in the mint family, Rhododon ciliatus. Again, found on those Eocene Sands with that one exception off toward the coast. And it's a member of the mint family, and so it has fragrant leaves. And I don't have a very good sense of smell, but people I know that do have a sense of smell all marvel at this thing when I bring it to them. It's like, this thing smells really good, according to them. So I'm thinking that, you can make tea out of just about any member of the mint family. So I have a friend who has this on his ranch, and I'm going to figure out how to make a good tea out of it and then convince him to start marketing this thing as a Texas tea. That'd be pretty cool but only if it tastes good and doesn't have any side effects. So my other job, the one that actually brings in income, is working at the UT Herbarium part-time, and it's in the UT Tower, the largest herbarium in Texas. So that's why they turned the tower orange and put 1 on it. For the UT Herbarium. For those of you who haven't heard, the herbarium is a collection of dried specimens. When we botanists go out and want to make a voucher specimen to prove that we saw what we say we saw, there's this 500-year-old technique of smashing a plant between paper and then mounting it on acid-free paper, and they've been doing this for 500 years. So there are lots of specimens in the world these days, and they take up a lot of space. They're mashed flat, but when you have 1 million specimens, you need a lot of room. So we're gradually taking over the tower, and it'd be cool when it's just nothing but herbarium, but it also means I spend most of my day riding elevators. Old elevators that break down constantly. Anyway, they have, of those 1 million specimens that the herbarium has, about 211,145 specimens as of 2014, the last time they updated their database, are from Texas. And it's amazing that number is such a small percentage. This herbarium is like an annex of Mexico. We have so many specimens from Mexico, it's amazing. Mexico puts us to shame in terms of the plant work they do of this sort. just massive quantities of inventories and documentation goes on in Mexico all the time. And most of their stuff goes to their big national herbarium in Mexico City, but most of the people that are doing big projects send their duplicates to us, so they'll be in more than one place. And so we have a massive collection from places like Oaxaca. And if you ever want to see specimens of tropical plants from Mexico, come to the tower, we got them. This is a great way to figure out where these plants are known from, because all the information on the labels is database now, and it's available online. So if you went back to that sand mint, for example, that Texas sand mint, you just type in the scientific name and it'll give you a list of all the locations from which it's been collected. It's a great tool. I mean, this used to be a major pain to have to go somewhere and write down the labels, information, and now it's like we're living in the 21st century. So here's the web address, but all you have to do is Google UT Herbarium and you'll find it eventually. And you'll get to this database page, and you can query it in a number of different ways, and this is what you get. But one of the cool features of this new system they have is that when you query something from one of the major families, you get an image, a scanned image of the specimen, which is really cool. You can zoom in on it and see all the fine features, all the little hairs, all the stuff you need to see to be able to distinguish it from other species. So here's what it looks like for one of the specimens of woolly white that I collected in Atascosa County 10 years ago. But that's what a dried specimen looks like. Smashed flat, dried, and mounted on acid-free, almost cardboard-like paper. And then a label. So all this label data that was on this thing that I typed out and printed out is databased. And you can get the original from the label on the specimen image. And then you can go to the database to see it all parsed out into various fields. But this is a great resource if you're interested in plants, want to know where you could find something. Just go with the scientific name, query it, look for a recent collection that has GPS points, which all the modern ones should, and just have at it. But you don't have to go to Austin to see a herbarium. There's one right here. Dr. Levens has a herbarium in this building. To judge from this picture, it looks like they're specializing in capturing that famous flying spurge of South Texas. Apparently the young lady on the right has just netted one. So in summary, Texas has an amazing bunch of plants. We're really lucky to be where we are, and not everybody realizes what a special place this is for Texas. Birds get all the attention. We have 300 species that are only found here, nowhere else in the world. We're still finding new species. And one of the coolest places to look for new species and endemics is right here in this narrow band of sand that on these Eocene substrates. So have at it and let me know what you find. Any questions?
So if we find some of these, we photograph them and send them to you?
Sure. Yeah, that's another great thing. Digital cameras. Who'd have thunk it? Yeah, it's a whole lot better than taking slides. Yes?
What is the common feature among plants that seem to be endemic on this physiological? Why do they grow just on this?
That's what I want to know. That is exactly what I want to know. It's, I mean, they're all different. I mean, some of them have deep root systems. Some of them are little tiny annuals that have roots just in the upper few inches. And some of those are kind of ephemeral. They're out, when it's wet, and then they disappear during the, dry seasons, as you'd expect. But I really don't know. And I don't know if anybody knows. That'd be a...
Do you find them in areas that are made heavily overgrazed?
So, depending on the species, yeah. Some of these species really don't like competition, and grazing can help reduce competition a lot. But others are almost like psiophytes or shade lovers. So I think originally this landscape was burned frequently. So I think it had openings, small openings, not big huge openings, but a whole lot of small openings. So there's a lot of partial shade during the course of the day, but not completely unshaded. But some of these endemics will go back into places that have been cleared and are growing like Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass pastures are, the big improvement that most people have made over the years. And God bless them, a lot of these things will come back. If you stop grazing and just you don't even have to hammer the Bermuda grass. A lot of these things can come in interspaces. So yeah, it's a good question. What else? Alan?
How do you go about organizing your field work? You do your research in the herbarium first to find out where these are found, and then what do you do? And do you contact landowners or folks like this? And do
Oh, it's real varied. I really like working with private landowners because that's where I can really make an impact. Like one of the things I said about the woolly white was that it likes areas that look totally unproductive. There's just nothing there but a bunch of sand and gophers and then, one or two weird looking plants. And that's what they like. They like that habitat without that competition. And I worked with a landowner of this big ranch in Caldwell County last year. I did a whole inventory of the ranch for the course of the whole year. And the first day, I found this rare plant on his place. So I went back to the ranch house and got him, and I dragged him back out there to see it. And then he said, "Well, I'm glad you told me that, because I always thought that place was unproductive and nasty, and I was gonna till it up and mulch it and see if I could get something to grow on it." And when I told him that you've got something growing on it and it's really rare, he was just, delighted. Said, "Oh, okay, now I don't have to do anything." So, what else? Yes?
Can you search the herbarium by common name? Or
No.
just no?
That is, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think it's a really academic institution, and they cater to major scientific groups and research. They haven't done the job of reaching out to master naturalists and master gardeners and hobbyists, and I'm really pushing for a change. I think that's really important because conservation is not going to happen in Texas through academia. It's got to happen with landowners and everyday people. Everybody's got to have access to this information, so we need to get that straight.
Are these plants in the rare books of rare plants of Texas?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah, 3 of them are that woolly white, the joint weed, and the Elmendorf onion.
Yeah,
So,
I have that.
oh, okay, good. Thank you. By the way, all the proceeds from the sale of that book go to plant conservation. Its authors didn't get any money. Or I'd be better dressed. Alan, I didn't follow up on the rest. Jackie Poole and Dana Price and Jason Singhurst, all excellent botanists. Jackie has since retired. Dana has gone to New Mexico, but Jason Singhurst is probably the most active and best botanist in the state at the moment. So, but I didn't finish your question, answering your question, Dr. Levens, about how I choose. When I'm looking for projects on my own, I pick places that are hot, and I talk to people that know landowners that can afford to hire a botanist. So that's a complicated process. But then when I'm not in those kind of projects, I assemble all the information. Like I get the geologic map, I get the soils map, get whatever information is available through the herbarium about what's known from the area. But mostly I just look. I mean, when I have like this ranch was over 1,000 acres, so I sort of looked at the aerial imagery and the soils map and tried to pick out representative areas that I could hit real hard, because you can't walk every square inch of a 1,000-acre ranch, so you have to be selective. And I usually do it by soils or geology if there's more than one member of the surface geology. And that's the way that works. But a lot of the better money is through government contracts. So this year I'm going to be working on Buescher State Park, which just burned this last fall. That's right next to Bastrop, and it's on Eocene substrates, but not the real sandy ones. But that could be really interesting, because I got to work at Bastrop State Park the year after the fire, and it was unbelievable. I mean, I heard all these people complaining about the dead trees, and I'm out there in this botanical wonderland, things that hadn't been seen in forever, and just everything was blooming, and it was just gorgeous, and I was like the only person in the park, because who wants to go see a bunch of dead trees, right? So, you know, the big trees are gone, but the park is a lot healthier than it was. They took out a lot of Yopon, and the pines actually came back so quickly. I was shocked when they started these pine planting projects, because this loblolly pine is fire dependent for germination of its seeds. So the first thing that happened after the fire was loblolly pine seedlings were coming up everywhere. And then there's these groups that are going out there planting loblolly pine. And I'm, okay. And after, I think it was 2014, I went out, and the ones that had naturally germinated during the winter of 2011, 2012 were anywhere from 4 to 8 feet tall. And the ones they planted were half that size, or most of them died. So anyway, so that's another thing is that. And I'm also working at Goliad. And then the city hired me to do an inventory of their contribution, the city of Austin's contribution to the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve is 13,000 acres. So I'm going to be working on that, and that'll be fun. So there's a lot of different ways things happen, but word of mouth mostly, and there aren't very many botanists. So I need some competition, you know. You guys, it's a really fun career. It's a lot of work, man. It's hard to break in, but you know, if you really get into it, there's no more rewarding way to spend your life than being a botanist, in my opinion. Yes?
Are most of these endemic plants spring through fall, or are there things that grow in winter?
Yeah, mostly spring through fall. There isn't a whole lot of action in the winter. I guess that's just from, you know, selection from the occasional really, really cold winter, which we'd hardly get anymore, but it's pretty much like other places. It's a huge spring event. And things taper off a little bit in the summer, although that's when this area's huge legume numbers come out. I mean, like late May and June, everything that's blooming is a member of the legume family. It's crazy. And then warm season grasses starting in August and September and until a freeze.
So you have like different things at different.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing about doing this kind of work is that everybody wants you to come out in April when they see that everything is blooming, and it's true. That everything, you know, a whole lot of things do bloom in April, but there's stuff going on all the time. So.
The other thing I wondered about is that, you know, you can't help but when you're out there see insects and things like that. Are you, I mean, do you record those things too?
I wish I had the time. It's, you know, it's hard enough to be focused on just plants. And if I had to do insects too, I'd be lost, because I really love bugs. So, you know, I'd never get anything done. But yeah, I think that's a way that people that have a more broad interest can really contribute to what we know about rare plants, is by looking at insects, what eats them, what pollinates them, all that stuff. And hardly any of it's known for rare plants. Yes?
I have a question about that woolly white. Looks like something that we have. We have 10 acres out in the Sandhills, and it looks like what I pulled up. Because it was just, you know, it was kind of in the wrong spot.
Uh-huh.
So if it is, okay, if it is, and
What's your address? Where's my phone?
If it is, though, I mean, you know, and if somebody came out and said, oh, yeah, well, that's it, then do I just invite people to come out and look at it? I mean, you don't dig it up because it doesn't go anyplace else really where it grows. So, you know, I mean, what happens after you identify, well, there it is?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's, I mean, I try to work with people. I tell them when I'm doing inventories that if I find a rare plant, I'm gonna put it in a database to share it with everybody. And so far, I haven't had anybody say no. I don't want you to do that, because it's not like just because it's in the database, people have the right to come and see it. It's still your property, you know. So, and And the property I worked on last year, I've talked to this guy the other day, and he hasn't heard anything from anybody. So, you know, you think it'd be really important for people, but there just aren't enough people that are interested in rare plants.
Because when you
The-
find a bird, everybody wants to
Exactly,
see it.
exactly. That doesn't happen with plants.
I
She
didn't
collected seeds from it, but then it would only be viable in another sandy.
You'd have to take the seeds and move them to someplace similar, that same kind of soil. And actually, but for that plant, don't feel bad because the one you got, there's another thing that looks quite a bit like it. So you may have gotten what they call the old Plainsman, which is in the same genus. That's Hymenopapus artemisiafolius. They look similar. The leaves are quite different. So you can distinguish between the two if you're certain of the characters at any time of year. Like that one is a biennial, so it comes up from seed in the winter and sits in the ground as a basal rosette for the first year, and the second year it flowers and then it dies. So they'll only be there for 2 years anyway, the individuals. So, but yeah, just take a picture, send it to me. They're easy to identify. So, but it's probably the other one. So don't lose any sleep.
Well, if it is, we got a lot of them.
Yes.
Is anything being published from the survey that was done in Bastrop? And now Busher, you're saying you're gonna survey it too? Because I know they found so much.
Yeah, I can send you the plant list. What we don't have, and there's a whole bunch of individual rare plant populations, but to my knowledge, they haven't taken the stuff that I wrote up, and there were 2 other botanists involved over a 10-year period, and I don't know that they've written up anything comprehensive that they would release to the public. But I can send you the plant list. That's not an issue. So.
Okay,
There's my email address. Just email me.
we should probably wrap it up. Maybe one last question if anybody had anything. Otherwise, let's thank Bill Carr for coming.
Thank you.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.